Okay. Let's unpack this. There is a very specific piece of software installed in the brains of almost everyone who grew up in the West since 1945. It is a story about Europe.
Right, the story of the Peace Project.
Exactly. It's a really comforting story. The narrative is that after centuries of just tearing each other apart,
World War I, World War II, the Holocaust.
yeah, the absolute devastation of the continent,
Yeah.
Europe finally figured it out. They built the EU, they opened the borders, and they linked their economies.
The logic was simple. If we trade together, if we share a currency, if we bind our industries, we simply won't bomb each other.
It is the ultimate success story of liberal democracy, or at least that's what we've been told.
It is a beautiful story. I mean, it's the story that won the Nobel Peace Prize. It is the story we tell our children. But the deep dive we are doing today, it basically takes that story, rips it up, sets it on fire, and then scatters the ashes.
Is it really that drastic?
It is. We are looking at source material that argues Europe has fundamentally transformed. It's no longer a peace project. It has become a war project.
And just to be clear for everyone listening, this isn't coming from fringe conspiracy theorists on some dark corner of the internet.
No, not at all.
This is coming from a very intense discussion between some heavy hitters in global economics and politics. We are unpacking a session moderated by Marin Khalili of Diam 25. And the guests are Yanis Varoufakis and Jeffrey Sachs.
Right, and if you know Yanis, you know he is the former Greek finance minister, the guy who famously stood up to the EU austerity machine in a leather jacket. He is an economist who understands the plumbing of the European system better than almost anyone.
And on the other side, you have Jeffrey Sachs. He's an American economist who has advised 3 secretaries general of the UN. He has been in the room with world leaders for 40 years.
From Gorbachev to the Pope.
Exactly. He is the ultimate insider who became a critic. And our goal today is to impartially map out their arguments. We are endorsing these views, but we are going to explore exactly what they are saying because it is a massive paradigm shift.
And they aren't just chatting about inflation rates or interest hikes here. They are reacting to the aftermath of the recent Munich Security Conference.
Right. And if you think you know what happens at these diplomatic summits, dry speeches, canapes, polite applause, you really need to hear how Sachs described this one.
He did not hold back at all. He called it pathetic. He called it sickening.
Sickening.
Yeah, he actually said it was worse than Davos.
Which, knowing his opinion of the billionaire class at Davos, is a scorching indictment. What exactly made it sickening? Was the catering?
No, it was the solipsism.
Oh, that's a great word, solipsism. Basically talking to yourself and thinking you are the only thing that exists in the universe.
Precisely. Sachs pointed out that the people in that room, the U.S. and European leadership, they represent maybe 10% of the human population.
10%.
But they were speaking as if they are the entire world. And the terrifying part, according to him, was the echo chamber. There wasn't a single dissenting voice.
No debate.
Zero. No smart ideas on de-escalation. He said the entire conference was just, how do we ramp up the war? Who do we fight next? And varying degrees of just how evil Putin is.
It sounds less like a diplomatic summit and more like a war council.
That is exactly what they argue it was, and the quiet part was said out loud. Sachs highlighted a speech by Marco Rubio, of all people.
What did Rubio say?
He explicitly stated that the goal is to maintain Western domination.
Western domination. See, that is where the mask slips. Usually they say rules-based international order.
Or defending democracy.
Right, or freedom. But domination, that feels very 19th century imperial.
Sachs called it obscene. He argues it is completely delusional in a world where China, India, and the global south are rising. You just can't dominate your way to stability anymore.
But here's the crux of today's deep dive. Europe isn't just being dragged along by this American delusion against its will.
No. Varoufakis argues that Europe has actively decided to make this its new identity.
Meaning what? They want to be the Spartans of the 21st century?
In a way, yes. Varoufakis observes that European politicians have lost the plot on economic prosperity. They can't deliver good jobs anymore.
They can't deliver cheap energy.
Right, and the social safety net is fraying. So to stay relevant, to literally keep their jobs, they have pivoted to defense and deterrence.
So if you aren't talking about sending tanks or boosting military spending, you just aren't a serious politician in Europe right now.
The Peace Project branding is officially dead. It is defense and deterrence now.
Dead and buried. And that leaves us with a massive mystery to solve for you, the listener. How did we get here? How did a continent designed to prevent war turn into a bloc that is reorganizing its entire existence around military confrontation?
To answer that, we have to go deeper than just the headlines. Looking at the roadmap from our sources, we have 3 distinct layers to get through.
Lay them out for us.
First, we have to look at the economic trap. This is Varoufakis' theory. He breaks down how Germany's industrial model made it completely subservient to the U.S. long before the first tank rolled into Ukraine.
Okay, so follow the money.
Always. Second, we have the historical betrayal. Jeffrey Sachs takes us on a time travel trip starting in 1945.
1945.
Yes. We are going to look at the death of FDR, the rise of the CIA, and the secret history of why the Cold War never really ended.
I love a good history lesson that flips the script. And the third layer.
The war union. This is the ugly reality on the ground today. We are talking about deindustrialization, the shift from making cars to making weapons, and what that actually does to your wallet and your society.
Let's start with the money, the economic trap.
Yeah.
Varoufakis has this theory that European sovereignty, the whole idea that EU is an independent superpower that makes its own choices, was always a facade.
A complete myth. A fairy tale. And he points to a structural requirement that most people forget or maybe never even knew. To join the European Union, or specifically to get into the club, you almost always had to join NATO first.
I always thought those were 2 completely separate tracks. One is trade and economics, and the other is a military alliance.
Yeah.
You can have one without the other, right?
Technically separate on paper, but politically tethered in reality. Look at the history. Greece, Spain, and later the Eastern Bloc countries like Poland or North Macedonia.
Right.
The ticket to Brussels was punched by joining the U.S.-led military alliance first. Varoufakis argues this tethered the EU to American military hegemony from day one. You couldn't be part of the European family unless you were part of the American military umbrella.
But the real trap, the actual handcuffs, were economic.
This is the mercantilist model he talks about.
Break that down for us, because mercantilism sounds like something from the 1700s. Ships and spices and all that.
It kind of is, but let's simplify it. Imagine a shopkeeper who sells the best high-end appliances in town. That is Germany. They make incredible stuff.
Mercedes, BMWs, industrial chemical.
Heavy machinery, exactly. But a shopkeeper needs a customer. You can have the best factory in the world, but if no one buys your product, you go broke.
And the customer is the United States.
Exactly. Germany became an export machine. They run a massive trade surplus. They sell way more than they buy. For that to work mathematically, someone else has to run a trade deficit. Someone has to buy all that stuff and go into debt to do it.
The U.S. agreed to be the consumer of last resort.
Yes. So Germany's entire economy, its factories, its jobs, its social stability, depends on Americans buying their cars.
And that creates a political leash.
If the U.S. market closes, Germany collapses. Varoufakis points to 2008 as the moment this dynamic shifted gears.
What happened in 2008?
Well, by then the U.S. had already crushed Russia economically in the 90s, so they weren't afraid of Moscow anymore. Washington decided to push for NATO expansion to lock down their control over Europe.
But wait a minute. Germany had a really good relationship with Russia then. They were getting cheap gas. They were building pipelines. Why would Germany agree to antagonize Russia, their main energy supplier?
That is the German dilemma. Yes, German industry wanted Russian gas. It was the perfect combo: cheap Russian energy to power the factories and rich American consumers to buy the products.
The best of both worlds.
But when push came to shove, and the U.S. said we are expanding NATO, Berlin had to do the math. They couldn't survive without the American market. They could survive painfully without Russian gas.
So when Washington yanked the leash, Berlin capitulated.
They chose the customer over the supplier. Every time, because you can find gas elsewhere, even if it is super expensive. You cannot find another American middle class to buy your BMWs.
That makes total sense.
And Varoufakis notes a new dynamic that makes this even worse: the East-West divide.
We used to always talk about the North versus South in Europe. You know, rich Germany scolding debt-ridden Greece during the Eurozone crisis.
Right, but now the power has shifted east, the Baltic states and Poland.
You mean countries like Estonia, Lithuania, Poland?
Exactly. These countries realize something very shrewd. They are small players economically compared to Germany or France, but they realize they can be huge players politically if they align themselves 100% with Washington.
So they become the teacher's pet of the U.S. and Europe.
Or the American Trojan horse, depending on your perspective. By being hyper-hawkish, by pushing for more NATO, more weapons, more confrontation with Russia, they amplify U.S. power in Brussels.
They squeeze the traditional powers.
Yes. If Schultz or Macron tries to talk about peace or diplomacy, the Polish and Baltic leaders, backed by the U.S. State Department, scream appeasement. It shuts down the conversation immediately.
So you have economic dependence from the top and political pressure from the east. Europe is caught in a pincer movement.
Which explains the how, but it doesn't explain the why.
Right. Why is the U.S. so obsessed with this expansion? Why not just enjoy the peace dividend after the Cold War? Why push for this confrontation?
This is where we need Jeffrey Sachs. And I have to say, for an economist, he tells a ghost story really well. He traces this whole mess back to one specific date.
April 12, 1945.
The death of Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Why is this the pivot point?
Yeah.
We were winning the war. The Nazis were literally about to surrender.
Because Sachs argues that FDR was the last U.S. president who genuinely believed in a multipolar world.
Multipolar meaning sharing power.
Yes. FDR's vision for the post-war era wasn't America rules everything, it was the United Nations. He wanted to work with Stalin. He wanted to work with China. He believed in collective security. He thought he could manage the relationship with the Soviets through diplomacy.
And then he dies, and we get Harry Truman.
And Truman was, well, Sachs portrays him as a small man in a big chair. He was unprepared. He didn't have FDR's vision or his confidence. And he was immediately surrounded by the hawks.
The men who would build the national security state.
Almost overnight, the narrative flipped from cooperation to an existential struggle against communism.
Enter the CIA.
1947, the National Security Act. Sachs is absolutely brutal on the CIA. And again, we are just reporting his arguments here. But he describes it not as an intelligence agency that gathers facts, but as a secret army of the president.
Or sometimes an army that defies the president.
He views the CIA as the primary engine of U.S. foreign policy, and its only goal is global hegemony, dividing the world into us versus them.
He told a story about Eisenhower that absolutely blew my mind. I knew about the U-2 spy plane, but I did not know the context Sachs provided. It plays out like a spy thriller.
It really does. Set the scene for us.
Okay, so it's 1960. Eisenhower is at the end of his term. He is a five-star general. He has seen the horrors of war, and he wants to leave office by making peace with the Soviets.
He has a major summit scheduled with Khrushchev in Paris.
Right. They are going to normalize relations. This is the big breakthrough. Eisenhower specifically orders the CIA, do not do anything provocative. Do not mess this up.
And the CIA basically says, hold my beer.
They launch a U-2 spy plane right over the heart of Russia.
Now, Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, he told Eisenhower not to worry. He said, Mr. President, if the plane is hit, it is flimsy, it will disintegrate.
And the pilot, Gary Powers, has a cyanide pill.
Exactly. Dulles says there will be no pilot, no plane, no proof. If they claim they shot it down, we just deny it.
But the plane didn't disintegrate.
Yeah.
And Gary Powers didn't take the pill.
The Soviets shoot it down. The plane crashes but remains largely intact. They capture Powers alive. They have the wreckage. But Eisenhower doesn't know this yet.
Because the CIA lies to him.
The CIA tells him the plane is gone. So Eisenhower goes on TV and lies to the American public and the world. He says it was just a weather plane that drifted off course.
And then Khrushchev plays the ace card.
He waits, he lets Eisenhower lie, and then he parades the pilot in the wreckage in front of the world cameras.
Eisenhower is humiliated. He's caught in a bald-faced lie on the world stage.
The summit is canceled. The peace initiative is dead. Sachs uses this to show that even the President of the United States, a literal war hero, a general, couldn't stop the military-industrial complex from sabotaging peace.
And he draws a straight line from there to JFK.
He does. He quotes JFK's famous fury after the Bay of Pigs.
That was another CIA disaster where they lied to the president, right?
Yes. Kennedy said he wanted to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. And Sachs is explicit here. He believes the CIA killed Kennedy because he tried to bring the security state to heel.
That is a very heavy accusation. We have to point out that is a highly controversial claim, but it is central to Sachs's worldview in this discussion.
It is. He presents it as the structural reality of American power. His chilling conclusion is that since November 1963, no president has truly dared to challenge the military-industrial complex.
The security state runs the show.
That is the deep state argument in its purest form.
But let's fast forward to the part that really hurts, the 1990s.
Ah, yes.
The wall comes down.
Yeah.
The Soviet Union collapses. We won. This was the moment for the peace project to go global. We had the chance to bring Russia into the fold.
And this is where the betrayal happens. And for Sachs, this isn't just history from a book. This is deeply personal. He was actually there.
He was advising Gorbachev, right?
He was advising Gorbachev's economic team and later Yeltsin's. Gorbachev was a true believer in peace. He dissolved the Warsaw Pact. He wanted a common European home.
But his country was broke.
Exactly. He needed help transitioning the Soviet economy so people wouldn't literally starve.
Sachs proposed a plan.
He did. He called it a grand bargain, basically a Marshall Plan for Russia. Billions in aid to stabilize the currency, provide food, and help them become a normal market economy.
It's what the U.S. did for Germany and Japan after World War II.
And it worked wonders. Germany became our ally because we helped them rebuild.
So what happened? Why didn't we do it for Russia?
The White House killed it. Sachs found the meeting minutes years later. Richard Darman, a senior official under George H.W. Bush, just dismissed the idea.
What does he say?
He called Gorbachev a showman and said, we don't need to give them money, just send them a PR package.
A PR package. That is incredibly cynical. Here's a brochure. Good luck with the starvation.
It gets worse. Sachs describes sitting in the Kremlin with Boris Yeltsin in 1991. The Soviet Union is gone. Russia is chaotic. And Yeltsin is pleading with him.
What was he saying?
He kept saying, we just want to be a normal country. Help us be normal.
That is a heartbreaking quote, actually. We want to be normal.
It is. Sachs tried. He went to the IMF. He went to the U.S. State Department. He said, look, if we don't help them, this is going to collapse into chaos or a dictatorship.
And the response he got was a brick wall.
He said it was like talking to a machine. The answer was just, it's not going to happen, Jeff.
Why? Why wouldn't we want a friendly, democratic Russia?
Because according to Sachs, the U.S. didn't want a partner. They didn't want an equal, they wanted a vassal, or they wanted a wreck.
Strategically, why?
The U.S. deep state has a nightmare scenario, a German-Russian alliance.
Explain that for me.
Think about it. German technology, German industry, German management combined with Russian natural resources, Russian oil, Russian titanium, Russian gas.
That creates an economic bloc that spans from Lisbon to Vladivostok.
And that bloc would be more powerful than the United States. The U.S. goal was to make sure that never happened.
So they let Russia collapse. They let the oligarchs loot the country. And that chaos paved the road for Vladimir Putin.
Exactly. They created the monster they now claim to be fighting. By refusing to integrate Russia when it was on its knees begging for help, they ensured that a nationalist backlash would eventually happen.
And there was the promise about NATO expansion, too.
Yeah, the famous not 1 inch eastward promise. Sachs insists, citing conversations with Helmut Kohl and Hans-Dietrich Genscher, that there was a clear promise. If Germany reunified, NATO would not move east.
And we all know how that turned out. Which brings us to the road to Ukraine. The source material highlights the 2008 Bucharest summit as the point of no return.
This was the moment, according to Sachs, where Europe lost it. George W. Bush showed up and announced that Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO.
Now, Angela Merkel was there. She is smart. She knew Russia's history. She knew this was a red line.
She knew. Everyone knew. William Burns, who is now the head of the Biden CIA, was the ambassador to Moscow back then.
Right, I've heard of this. He wrote a memo.
He wrote a very famous memo called Net means net, no means no. He warned Washington that expanding NATO to Ukraine was the brightest of all red lines, not just for Putin, but for the entire Russian political class. Even the liberals in Russia hated the idea.
So why didn't Merkel let it happen?
She tried to stop it initially. She and the French pushed back. But eventually she caved to U.S. pressure. She allowed the announcement to be made.
Sachs argues this was a historic failure of European leadership.
He says if Merkel had stood up and said, George, you broke the Middle East, you are not breaking Europe, we wouldn't be in this war today. But she didn't.
It fits the exact pattern we talked about earlier. Economic dependence leads to political cowardice.
And it fits the strategy of Zbigniew Brzezinski.
The grand chessboard guy.
Yes. Back in 1997, Brzezinski wrote that the key to U.S. hegemony was to surround Russia in the Black Sea.
Take Ukraine, take Romania, take Georgia.
Turn the Black Sea into a NATO lake. This cuts Russia off from the Mediterranean and turns it into a landlocked regional power.
It sounds like 19th century imperialism.
Sachs actually calls it the Second Crimean War. It is the exact same strategy the British Empire used in the 1850s under Lord Palmerston to contain Russia. The players change, but the map stays the same.
And then we have 2014, the Maidan. Now, the standard story we hear on the news in the West is that it was a democratic revolution. The people rose up.
But Sachs calls it a coup.
A violent regime change operation.
He points to Victoria Nuland, the U.S. diplomat who was famously caught on tape discussing exactly who should run the new Ukrainian government.
The infamous the EU phone call, right?
That's the one. Sachs argues that Yanukovych, the ousted president, wasn't just a Putin puppet. He was actually trying to be neutral.
You wanted to trade with both Russia and the EU.
He was caught in the middle. But the U.S. said, you can't sit on the fence. You have to choose.
And when you force a country like Ukraine, which is historically deeply divided between East and West, to choose sides, you just tear it apart.
Which brings us to the most explosive part of their discussion. The event that physically severed the relationship between Germany and Russia, Nord Stream.
The pipelines. The physical umbilical cord between German industry and Russian gas.
Blown up. Destroyed.
Varoufakis and Sachs were pretty clear on who they think did it.
They point the finger directly at the U.S. and the CIA.
And again, we are reporting their claims.
Right. They argue that Russia had absolutely no incentive to blow up its own pipeline. It was their main leverage over Europe.
The U.S., however, had stated openly that they wanted to end Nord Stream.
But the whodunit isn't even the most interesting part to them. It is the reaction.
The silence from Europe.
Varoufakis calls it depravity. Think about it. Imagine your ally blows up your critical infrastructure, the literal lifeline of your economy, and you do not say a single word.
You just look at your shoes and shuffle your feet.
That is the ultimate proof that sovereignty is dead. You cannot even complain when your ally blows up your pipeline because you are too afraid of losing access to their market.
And that leads us to the war union reality today. Because that silence has a massive price tag, and the German people and the European people are paying it right now.
We are talking about deindustrialization.
It's happening in real time.
Energy prices in Germany have skyrocketed because they lost the cheap Russian gas, and at the exact same time, the U.S. passed the Inflation Reduction Act,
which heavily subsidizes energy and manufacturing in America.
So German companies are looking at the math. They say energy is expensive here, it is cheap in America, and the U.S. government will give us tax breaks.
Goodbye, Germany. Hello, South Carolina.
It is a giant vacuum cleaner sucking jobs and capital out of Europe. Varoufakis gives a chilling example from the automotive industry, Volkswagen.
The ultimate symbol of German manufacturing.
They are struggling. They cannot compete with Chinese EVs or Tesla because their energy costs are just too high. So what is the solution? Varoufakis says production lines are being handed over to Rheinmetall,
the weapons manufacturer.
Yes. They are shifting from making family cars to making parts for Leopard tanks. This is what Varoufakis calls military Keynesianism.
Explain that term for us. Keynesianism.
Keynesianism is when the government spends money to stimulate the economy. Usually you spend it on bridges, schools, hospitals.
Infrastructure.
Right. Military Keynesianism is when your economy is failing, so you pump massive amounts of tax money into the defense industry to keep the factories running. You aren't building an economy for people anymore. You are building an economy for war.
It is a really dark transformation from the peace project to the tank project.
And Sachs points out it is happening in the tech sector, too, the technology deficit.
Tell me about ASML.
ASML is a Dutch company. They make the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines that print the world's most advanced microchips. They are arguably the most important tech company on Earth right now.
And they are European.
They are. But does Europe control them? No. The U.S. government decided that China shouldn't have these advanced chips, so Washington forced the Netherlands to ban exports to China.
ASML lost its biggest growth market overnight.
So a European company takes a massive financial hit to serve U.S. foreign policy goals. Sachs argues a truly sovereign Europe would say, we make the chips, we decide who buys them.
But they don't. Europe pays the price while America calls the shots.
Again and again. And it is fundamentally changing the social fabric of these countries, too. Look at Sweden and Finland.
Join NATO.
This really upset Varoufakis. These were the bastions of social democracy. Neutrality wasn't a weakness for them. It was their superpower.
It allowed them to focus on healthcare, education, and equality.
It allowed them to be independent mediators in global conflicts. And now they are in NATO.
And Varoufakis argues that this militarization is dragging them to the political right.
He actually used the F word, fascism.
Wow.
He believes that as these societies gear up for war, as they institute conscription and ramp up defense spending, they are becoming more unequal, more paranoid, and less democratic. They are losing their souls to become just another cog in the NATO machine.
It is a grim picture, a deindustrialized, militarized, completely subservient Europe. So is there a way out of this? Or is this just the new normal?
Well, the outlook from our sources is mixed. Varoufakis is definitely the pessimist here. He thinks the forever war is actually the goal.
Why would anyone in power want this to go on forever? It's ruining their economies.
Because it covers up their failures. If you are a European leader and your economy is tanking and you have no actual solutions, war is a fantastic distraction.
You can just tell your voters, I know gas is expensive, but we have to sacrifice for freedom.
It justifies the status quo. He thinks the elites want a simmering conflict, like a permanent Korea-style partition in Ukraine. That keeps the military spending high, it keeps the population frightened, and it keeps the U.S. happy.
But surely the voters won't buy that forever. I mean, look at the approval ratings across Europe.
That is where Sachs sees a glimmer of hope. He was absolutely brutal about the current crop of leaders.
He called them non-entities, right?
Yes. And Macron, Schultz, Sunak, Starmer, von der Leyen. He called them non-entities with vanishingly small approval ratings.
So there's a massive disconnect. The elites are gung-ho for war, but the regular person is struggling to pay rent and has zero interest in fighting Russia.
Exactly. And Sachs believes in what you might call the sane voice theory. He thinks the U.S. hold on Europe is actually quite fragile underneath it all.
Fragile how?
He argues that it would only take one major European leader to break ranks.
Just one.
Just one. If a German chancellor or a French president stood up, picked up the phone, called Putin, and said, "We are done. We want peace. We are returning to neutrality. Let's do business."
The entire house of cards would fall.
The U.S. simply couldn't stop a united Europe that genuinely wanted peace.
But Varoufakis doesn't buy that.
No. Varoufakis says the institutional corruption runs too deep. He thinks rationality won't win because the think tanks, the media, the major political parties, they are all bought and paid for by the Atlanticist network.
So the system is rigged to protect the war union.
He thinks real change will have to come from the streets, from the people simply refusing to accept this new reality.
So we have the peace project that became the war project. We have a continent that traded its economic engine for a tank turret. And we have a looming question.
Will Europe wake up and reclaim its sovereignty, or will it become a geopolitical museum guarded by American soldiers?
That is the question of the decade.
And the answer won't be found in the press releases coming out of the Munich Security Conference. It will be found in whether the European public decides they have finally had enough.
It is heavy stuff. But you can't fix a problem until you admit you have one. And today's deep dive suggests Europe has a very big problem.
Indeed. Understanding the history, the economics, and the missed opportunities is the first step to figuring out what comes next.
If the peace project is dead, and the war project leads to economic ruin, what is the third option? Will the next great European shift come from the halls of power or from the streets? Something to think about. Thanks for exploring this with us. We will catch you on the next deep dive.